So, Moses, I am everything that you need to go back to Egypt and to do what I've called you to do. It goes on to verse 35. This Moses, whom they rejected, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge, is the one God sent to be a ruler and a deliverer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. He brought them out after he had shown wonders and signs in the land of Egypt and in the Red Sea and in the wilderness 40 years. See, to begin to draw it all kind of back together. You know, it's not just a history lesson here. He's got to point to the history lesson. He's going to start kind of pulling it together for us here. Stephen is saying, listen, your fathers, our fathers, rejected the one who God had sent. God sent him the first time. They rejected him, right? And he says, listen, he said, this Moses, even though you rejected the first time and said, who are you to be a ruler and a judge over us? He is the one that God picked. Because we know that because God used him in a mighty way to deliver the nation of Israel. And he did turn water into blood, and he had all those 10 plagues and all the amazing miracles that God did at the hand of Moses. He clearly was God's chosen one. And he's saying, yet your fathers rejected him. And as you begin to look at this, it's amazing when you study the story of Moses. And then, you know, the Bible tells us that Moses was the most humble man that ever lived. Because he had been trained by God for 40 years, right? All that humility that he learned there in the desert. But the reality is that God used this very humble man to do amazing, miraculous things in the nation of Egypt that they had never seen before. And he did use Moses to deliver them by a great deliverance, even though his own people had rejected him. And when you go on to begin to look at this picture that he's drawing for us here, he used Joseph as an example. That was the first person he spent a lot of time talking about. Joseph was chosen by God at a young age to deliver the nation of Israel. And yet, at his first coming to his brothers, what did they do? They sold him out of jealousy to Egypt. But then the second time that Joseph is revealed to his brothers, they accept him as their deliverer, right? When they're there eating grain from him, they now see that God really did raise him up to deliver them. Same thing with Moses. First time Moses tried to go deliver his people, they said, who are you and who made you a judge and a ruler over us? And they rejected him the first time. But yet when he comes back the second time, when God sends him back to the children of Israel, they accept him the second time as their deliverer. And he's saying here, listen people, he's telling the nation of Israel, look at your tendencies. This is the history of our fathers. Our fathers have a habit of rejecting God's deliverer. Look at our history. It proves it over and over that when God sent a deliverer, our fathers' first reaction was to reject them. But yet when God did it the second time, then they accepted him. Look at our history. And he's applying this to Jesus Christ. He said, listen, don't you see you're just like your fathers? God had a plan for deliverance, and he sent his son, his only son, Jesus Christ. And out of jealousy, you guys sold him to the Romans. Out of jealousy, you rejected your deliverer. But we know, Romans chapter 11 tells us this, that when Jesus Christ comes back again, that all of Israel shall be saved. All of Israel will be saved at his second coming. Because the reality of this is their tendency to reject their deliverer the first time around, but accept him the second time. And he's using their history to show them, listen, you rejected your deliverer. But there's also hope in that God is going to send him the second time. And when Jesus Christ comes back the second time, the nation of Israel will accept him as their deliverer, and he will deliver the nation of Israel with the greatest deliverance of their entire history. And that's what Stephen is saying here, as he's bringing it all to this point, that they tend to reject their deliverers, but God would deliver them anyway. It goes on and it says in verse number 37, this is that Moses who said to the children of Israel, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brethren. Him you shall hear. This is he who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai and with our fathers, the one who received the living oracles to give to us, whom our fathers would not obey, but rejected. And in their hearts they turned back to Egypt, saying to Aaron, make us gods to go before us. As for this Moses who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And they made a calf in those days, offered sacrifices to the idol, and rejoiced in the works of their own hands. So now as we continue on in our history lesson here from Stephen, he says, listen, God chose Moses to be your deliverer, and God chose Moses to be the one to whom he would give the very oracles of God. We know that God gave the law to Moses. Moses went up to Mount Sinai, if you remember this story, and a cloud covered the mount of Mount Sinai, and he spent time up there with the Lord, where the Lord was giving him all of the law. And if you remember, he was up there for a long time. And so the children of Israel began to say amongst themselves, like, we're not sure what happened to Moses. Maybe he's dead. Maybe he's never coming back. What's going to happen to us? They began to panic. And if you remember, at this point, they go to Aaron, Moses' brother, and they say, build us an idol. Build us a God that we can worship. Because we're not sure this Moses is ever coming back. And you remember, Aaron has them all break up the areas that are in their ear, and he collects all the gold, and they make a golden calf. And they begin to dance around the calf and celebrate and go this whole idol worship with this golden calf. Moses, meanwhile, is on the mountain with God. God says, Moses, you're never going to believe what's going on down that mountain, all right? Those people are already, after this great deliverance with which I delivered them, dancing around a calf. And he said, you know what, Moses? They're stiff-necked and rebellious people. I'm going to kill them all. I'm just going to wipe them out, and then I'll make a new nation out of you. And if you remember, Moses falls on his knees before the Lord, and he pleads for their lives. He says, please don't wipe them out, Lord. Have mercy on them one more time. And God relents from him to anger. And he says, then you better get down from that mountain, and you better stop this. So Moses, if you remember him hurrying down the mountain, he throws down the tablets that God had made, and he takes this golden calf, he grinds it into little pieces, and he puts it in the water, and he makes them all drink it. But if you remember, at the point of this story is, as he's saying here, as Stephen's son, he says, listen, God gave Moses the law, and your fathers, who were there when God gave it to them, didn't even obey it. Did? And you're still not obeying it now. Because the reality is that as you begin to look at this, I think oftentimes, we can be so hard on the nation of Israel. As we study through the children of Israel, you look at that story and you go, how could they be so stupid? I mean, they saw the 10 plagues go through Egypt. All the firstborn in the whole land of Egypt who did not have the Passover blood on their doorposts, all the firstborn children died in one night. They saw that happen. Then they were led by a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night that shows them exactly where to go. And then they got boxed into the Red Sea, and they saw God part the Red Sea, and they crossed on dry land. And then when they get to the other side, they have no food. So God starts sending bread from heaven every morning. And then they run out of water, and there's a rock, and Moses hits the rock, and water flows from the rock. Okay, they've seen all of these miracles with their own eyes, and yet in such a short amount of time, it says that they were dancing around a calf and had turned their hearts back to Egypt. Because what happened? They hit a bump in the road, and their first response was to turn their hearts back to Egypt. And we can look at them, we can be so critical and think, how could they do that? It was such a great deliverance that God delivered them by, and they so quickly turned their heart away from the Lord. But you know what? We as people are no different than they are. How many people do you know who God has delivered the great deliverance? He has saved them from their sins, saved them from drugs and alcohol and you name it, and he has delivered them from bondage. And then they hit a bump in the road. And what's the first reaction? Is to run right back to Egypt. To go right back to that place where God delivered them from. And we all have that tendency to run to the world when we hit a bump in the road. The reality of it is, the problem with this is that, for the nation of Israel, here they are, they're looking back and they're saying, oh, we want to go back to Egypt in their hearts. Because they had made it this glorious thing, and I'm sure the Lord is going, hello, do you not remember the hard labor? Do you not remember the whips on your back? Do you not remember taking your babies and throwing them into the Nile River? And this is where you want to go. After I've delivered you with such a great deliverance. But we all do that, don't we? We make the world look so pretty. I mean, we make it seem so appealing that, yeah, you know what? When you have a hard day, let's go get drunk. That sounds like a fun thing to do. But is it? Is it all that glamorous that the world makes it look like? Because we forget about the hangover and the puking and the mess that our life was. That's the truth, though. God has delivered us from a whole bunch of mess. And our tendency is, when life gets tough, to run right back to that mess. And so our hearts are prone to wander. But when we remember, oh my gosh, look at what all God saved me from. We remember how dirty the world really is. It helps us to not want to run back there so quickly. But the other thing is as you look at this, and you look at all the miracles that the children of Israel experienced, and yet they still struggled. Because the children of Israel, when they got to a problem, their first reaction was always complaining. Their first reaction was always trying to figure it out in their own strength. But they had a problem with faith. And the reality of it is, we all do too. How many of you's first reaction when life does not go your way is to respond in faith? To just say, I know God's got this. Or our first reaction is usually to complain, to worry, to stay up all night, to stress out, to try to figure it out in our own strength. I know that's mine, and the Lord has to say, hello, did you not know that I parted the Red Sea a month ago? What's your problem? Why are you already forgetting everything that I've done for you? But the reality is that it's true. For the nation of Israel, they needed to look back on all the miracles that God had done and say, you know what, okay, remember it looked really bad when we went against the Red Sea, but my God did you parted the Red Sea, we walked through on dry land. And go through miracle by miracle, God's amazing deliverance and God's amazing provision for them. And the reality of it is, in your life and in my life, if I would look back on all the miracles that God has done throughout my life, then I would be quicker to respond with faith and not failure. Because the truth is that when I hit that bump in the road, man, my knee-jerk reaction is to freak out. But if I'll take a minute and I'll contemplate the great I am that is the God that I serve. And I would look back at my history and I would say, look at my life. Remember when things looked so bad then, and look how God did that. And remember when we had no money to pay that bill, and God sent a check. And remember, you just go through your history and you see God's faithfulness. And you know what? It builds up our faith. Because when I realized, okay, God was faithful last month. God was faithful last year. God was faithful 4 years ago. And by golly, God is going to be faithful tomorrow. It builds up my faith. And I have this sign in our house. It's my favorite flag that we have. It says, great is thy faithfulness. And that's the truth. We serve a God who is great in faithfulness, who never lets us down, who is never shaken when we are shaken, who is the great I am, who says, listen, I'm going to supply everything that you need when you need it, who knows how long I need to be in the desert before he can deliver me. He knows all these things about me. And he loves me. That's why he saved me by a great deliverance. And he said, Lydia, the last thing I want you to do is try to run to the world for your comfort and run to the world for your answers. He says, listen, run to me, because I am all that you will ever need. I am faithful to the end. It goes on and it says, then God turned and gave him up to worship the host of heaven, as it is written in the book of the prophets. Did you offer me slaughtered animals and sacrifices during 40 years in the wilderness? O house of Israel, you also took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Rephan, images through which you made to worship, and I will carry you away to Babylon. As you begin to look at this, if you remember, Stephen is giving his defense here, and he's giving a sermon showing them the error of their ways. If you remember, as he's doing this, the accusations that were brought against him is that he'd been blasphemous against Moses. So he kind of already dealt with that. He said, listen, these people got the law from Moses' mouth, and yet still didn't do what they're supposed to do. We're still not doing what we're supposed to do now. And he's going through this whole defense. But here, as we're going to kind of end here for today, we'll finish the rest of the sermon tomorrow, or next week. But he ends here in this section talking about how the nation of Israel was so prone to return to their idols. They had made that golden calf, but throughout their history, from the time when God delivered them from Egypt, all the way through when Joshua takes them through the promised land, and they are, kicking out all the other nations from the promised land, up until the time when they would go into captivity to Babylon, they always struggled with idolatry. And the reality is that God had said in the law, you shall have no other gods before me. I am a jealous God. And yet, over and over, you see all these nations that surrounded the promised land where the Israelites were going were full of idolatry. It was the Ashtaroth and the Baals and